Claire had just been thrown out of the university, her future slipping through her fingers like sand. The security guards had escorted her out of the campus, cold and impersonal, without a shred of empathy. She still felt the sting of humiliation as the last words they had spoken echoed in her mind. No payment, no classes, no degree. Claire had tried everything to gather the funds, working late nights at cafes, taking up odd jobs, even borrowing from friends. But nothing had been enough. The semester had ended, and her tuition fees were still unpaid. She glanced down at the scattered books in her arms, the pages of her life torn, quite literally, from the edges. Her fingers brushed the edges of the pages as she stood up, trying to compose herself, but the tears came anyway. She couldn't hold them back. The world felt like it was closing in on her. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now, in one moment, it was all slipping away. With a deep breath, she wiped her eyes and headed home. The sun was setting over the city as Claire walked down the street, her heart heavy with the weight of her shattered dreams. But when Claire arrived at her apartment, she found the door locked. Not a single sign of life inside. The landlord's voice echoed from the other side. "Claire, you have 1 day to pay or get out," he had shouted a week ago when she had begged for more time. She knocked desperately. "Please, just 1 more day," she pleaded, the last of her pride slipping away. The door swung open, and there he stood, holding her belongings in his hands, her small suitcase, a stack of clothes, and her few prized possessions. "No more time," he snapped, throwing her things onto the sidewalk. She stood there, stunned, unable to speak. The weight of the world crushed her as the landlord slammed the door behind him, leaving her on the cold concrete, her future now a pile of things no one cared about. She bent down, hands trembling, as she gathered her few belongings, the noise of her sobs swallowed by the bustle of the city around her. With nowhere else to go, Claire began walking, not sure where her feet were taking her. The thought of the street was terrifying. She had no money, no support, no family to turn to. Her feet carried her from street to street, knocking on doors, asking for any work. "Anything, please," she begged at bakery doors, restaurants, grocery stores. Anything that would keep her alive for another day. But every door was slammed shut, one after another. She was just another girl, another desperate soul with no one to care. Tears burned her eyes again as she walked, feeling smaller and smaller with every rejection. She passed well-dressed people, talking loudly on their phones, living lives she would never know. "Please, God," she whispered through her tears, "give me something, anything." That was when she found herself standing at the entrance of a massive gate. It was a grand estate, something out of a dream, towering over her with high walls and wrought iron gates. She had never seen anything like it. The gates were tall and intimidating, stretching across the road like a fortress. Claire stopped and looked up at the estate, lost in the sight. This was beyond anything she had ever imagined. The perfect mansion, the wealth, the luxury. It seemed like another world entirely. She sighed deeply, wiping her tears, wondering how it felt to live behind those gates, safe, rich, and secure. "Must be nice," she whispered bitterly to herself, unaware that the car pulling into the estate had come to a stop. She didn't even realize the man in the car was staring at her until he rolled down the window. "Are you lost?" Startled, Claire looked up, and her heart stopped in her chest. There he was, the man who seemed to belong to another world entirely. Alexander Westbrook, the billionaire CEO of Westbrook Enterprises. He was just as she had imagined, tall, strong, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that locked onto hers with a steady gaze. His face was calm, cold even, but his voice was clear and commanding. He was looking at her as if he had just found a person on the street, someone out of place in his world. "I'm looking for work," Claire stammered, her voice shaking from exhaustion. She wasn't sure why she felt compelled to speak to him, but the words were already spilling from her lips. "I'll do anything. Please, I need a job." He studied her for a moment, his gaze unwavering. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes, like he could see straight through her, but it was also detached, like she was nothing more than a fleeting moment of interest. "A job?" His voice held a hint of amusement. "You think you'll find one here?" Claire's eyes filled with tears again, her frustration rising to the surface. Please, I need something." Her voice cracked. For a brief moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a glimpse of something almost human. But it was gone in an instant. "Come with me," Alexander said, his tone suddenly softer, though still commanding. "I might have something for you." Alexander opened the door to his car and asked Claire to enter. With her heart pounding in her chest, she hopped in. Alexander drove her through the gate of the estate towards the massive front doors of the mansion. Her mind raced. What was happening? How had she ended up here, standing in front of this imposing figure? She had been thrown out of the university and her apartment, rejected, humiliated. And now she was entering a billionaire's estate with nothing but the clothes on her and few of her belongings. She followed him into the grand hallway, her eyes wide as she took in the mansion's beauty. Glistening marble floors, high ceilings, chandeliers that looked like they belonged in a palace. The place was a palace, she realized, and she was standing in the midst of it, feeling more out of place than ever. Alexander stopped in front of a large door. "This is my home," he said, turning to face her. "You'll be staying here for now." Claire blinked, confused. "Staying?" He raised an eyebrow, his gaze cold again. "I'm offering you a job, a domestic worker, a place to stay. You're not leaving until you decide what you want." Claire's mind reeled, and she said, "I am unsure of what to even think or feel right now." He didn't reply. Instead, he handed her a contract, cold and official, like a business transaction. "Sign it," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "If you want the job." The weight of the moment pressed on her. She knew it wasn't just a job. It wasn't just a paycheck. There was something else here, something that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with power, control, and the unknown. With trembling hands, Claire took the pen. As she signed the contract, something inside her warned her to stop, but she couldn't. Her life had been slipping away, and now she was signing away what little she had left. But what choice did she have? Her hand hovered over the pen, and just as she finished signing, she looked up, meeting Alexander's gaze. "Welcome to my world," he said softly, as if his words held more than just a greeting. And just like that, Claire's world shifted. As the ink dried on the contract, Claire's hand trembled slightly. She had done it. She had signed away what little was left of her freedom. But what choice did she have? Her life had been reduced to a series of desperate steps. She had walked into Alexander Westbrook's world, not knowing what she was agreeing to, but too desperate to care. Alexander didn't look at her as though he had just made an arrangement with a desperate woman. No, he looked at her as if he had just closed a deal, a business deal. His eyes were cold, yet there was something in the way he looked at her now that sent a chill down her spine. "You'll stay here for as long as it takes," Alexander said, folding the contract and placing it into a drawer. "We'll have you in the guest wing. The staff will attend to you. You'll get what you need. You'll act as my companion for social events. In return, I'll ensure you're taken care of. That's the arrangement." The word companion hung in the air, and Claire's heart sank. She had heard that word used before in the world of the rich and powerful, but she never thought she'd be in the position to hear it directed at her. She felt in reality, this is just another acquisition for his empire. "I'm not here for your companionship," she said, trying to steady her voice. "I'm here because I need a job. I need money to survive." Alexander's expression didn't change. "We both know you need more than just money, Claire. Everyone has their price. Yours happens to be a simple arrangement, a contract." She wanted to argue, but there was nothing left to say. She had signed, and that was that. A contract, a business deal, a fake marriage. She nodded, biting back the rising panic. "When do I start?" "You already have." The next few days were a blur of odd conversations and strange looks. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in a dream, or rather, a nightmare, wearing a mask she didn't recognize. The staff greeted her with cold politeness, while Alexander remained distant, always watching her from the shadows of the house, as if he were silently calculating her every move. Claire had been placed in a spacious guest room, one of the many in the vast mansion. It was beautifully furnished, with a breathtaking view of the city below, but there was nothing warm about it. It felt like a cage, decorated with the finest materials. Her days were filled with long hours of isolation, reading the contract over and over, trying to make sense of what she had agreed to. The evenings, though, were different. That was when Alexander invited her to accompany him to social events, pretending she was more than just a housekeeper, pretending she was his wife for the night. At these events, Alexander was the charming billionaire CEO, and Claire was the silent accessory, barely noticed by anyone. But the deeper they went into this strange marriage, the more she began to notice something in his eyes, a flicker of something human. It was subtle, but it was there. And for the first time, Claire wondered if there was more to this arrangement than she had originally thought. 3 weeks passed, and the tension between Claire and Alexander grew. She had always kept her distance, never letting her guard down. She had never expected anything to come of this arrangement, until one night when everything changed. It was late, after a long gala filled with wealthy socialites and business moguls. Claire had kept to herself for the most part, as usual. But when the event ended and they returned to the penthouse, Alexander acted differently. His usual coldness replaced by something that felt almost vulnerable. He led her into his study, the space where he worked, surrounded by leather chairs and bookshelves stacked with business books and legal documents. The room was dimly lit, the atmosphere heavy with tension. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, his voice low, almost tentative, "about our arrangement. I think we need to talk about the terms again." Claire crossed her arms, eyeing him warily. "I've already signed the contract. There's no need to renegotiate." He met her gaze with an intensity that almost took her breath away. "You're right, you signed the contract. But there's more to this than just what's on paper." Claire frowned. "What are you saying?" He stepped closer, his eyes softening for the first time since they had met. "I'm saying that this," he motioned between them, "isn't just about business. I didn't expect this to happen, but I'm starting to care about you, Claire." The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Claire stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never expected this, never thought it would happen. But there it was. He was saying that he cared. For a moment, Claire couldn't speak. The words wouldn't come. She had been so used to keeping her emotions in check, to hiding her vulnerabilities. But now, standing in front of Alexander, the walls she had so carefully built were starting to crumble. "You don't know what this is like for me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't know what it feels like to have nothing, to be thrown away like an object. I wasn't supposed to be here, Alexander. I wasn't supposed to be your fake wife. I'm just a girl who got lucky enough to sign a contract." Alexander's expression softened, and he stepped forward, his hand gently brushing against her arm. "I know, but I'm not just asking you to be my fake wife on paper anymore. I want you to be real with me. I want to see the real you, Claire." Claire's breath hitched in her throat. She could feel the sincerity in his words, but she was afraid. Afraid of what this would mean for her. Afraid of opening herself up to someone who had been a stranger just a few weeks ago. But she couldn't hold back anymore. "I don't know how to trust you," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't know how to trust anyone anymore." Alexander's gaze softened even more. He took another step closer, and this time there was no hesitation. "Then let me show you how." He reached out, gently cupping her face with his hands, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped her eye. "Let me show you that I'm not just a contract, Claire. I'm not just the man you signed up a contract with. I'm more than that. I can be the man you need, the man who cares about you." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Claire allowed herself to believe. Before she could respond, Alexander leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a soft, tentative kiss. It wasn't like the others. It wasn't filled with the force of desire or control. It was gentle, searching, asking for permission. Claire's heart raced, her mind torn between the life she had known and the life she was beginning to realize she might want. When the kiss ended, they both stood there, breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. "I'm not asking you to fall in love with me," he whispered, "but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Few weeks later, the mansion was quiet, the air thick with unspoken thoughts as Claire sat on the sofa, trying to process the strange turn her life had taken in the past weeks. But something about her situation still didn't add up, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She glanced at Alexander, who had been more distant in recent days, his eyes often clouded with a storm of thoughts. Claire felt the weight of his silence and decided to break it. "I've noticed you've been distant lately," she said softly. "I thought we were getting somewhere, but now it feels like you're pulling away again." Alexander's gaze flickered toward her, his lips pressed into a thin line. For a long moment, he said nothing, as if trying to decide whether to tell her the truth. Finally, he let out a sigh, standing up and walking toward the window. His back was turned to her as he spoke. "There's something I haven't told you, Claire," he began, his voice low. "The reason I stayed single all these years, the reason I've kept everyone at a distance, is because of something I was too afraid to face myself." Claire stood up, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you talking about?" He turned around slowly, his face a mix of pain and hesitation. "I've been impotent," he said in a whisper, as if saying it out loud was somehow a betrayal. "Doctors had declared me impotent, unable to father a child, and despite my wealth and power, I remained isolated, afraid that my secret would be exposed." Claire was stunned into silence. Her mind raced with confusion and questions. "But you're a billionaire. You could have any woman, any time. Why hide it?" Alexander looked down, his eyes filled with an emotion Claire hadn't expected. I didn't want anyone to pity me. I didn't want the media to know. The paparazzi would have a field day. They would tear me apart, Claire. And I didn't want anyone to know my weakness. I've built my empire, but I couldn't let anyone see me as less of a man. He paused, his chest rising and falling with every breath. So, I stayed away from relationships, kept myself distant, and buried myself in my work. I told myself I didn't need anyone. Claire's heart softened at the vulnerability in his voice. And now? He looked at her, his gaze intense, his voice barely a whisper. Now, I've realized I don't want to be alone anymore. But I didn't expect this. You. That night, everything changed. Claire had never imagined this moment. She had been nervous and hesitant, unsure of her place in Alexander's life. But when the door to his chambers opened and she saw him standing there, his expression filled with a mix of longing and vulnerability, something shifted inside her. They had both been dancing around each other for weeks, unsure of where this was going. But tonight, everything felt different. As she stepped into the room, Alexander's eyes locked onto hers, the silent tension between them thickening. I've never felt this before, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Not with anyone. Without another word, he reached for her, and Claire, despite her fear, didn't pull away. She didn't want to. As he pulled her closer, Claire's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the heat radiating from him, his presence overwhelming her in the most intoxicating way. The chemistry between them was undeniable. But there was something she hadn't told him, something that had weighed on her heart since the moment they had started getting closer. Be gentle with me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. This is my first time. Alexander froze. For the first time, a flicker of shock crossed his face. He looked down at her, his breath catching. There was a flicker of something almost like vulnerability in his gaze. You're a virgin? He asked, his voice hoarse. Claire nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. A wave of realization washed over him. Alexander had never been with anyone, either. It wasn't that he didn't have the opportunity. He was a billionaire, powerful, desired, admired. But the truth was far different. He had never been able to function as a man, as a lover, due to his medical condition. Alexander had been declared impotent by doctors at the age of 22. No woman, no matter how beautiful or rich, could ever make him feel like a man. It wasn't just about sex. It was about his incapacity to function as a man, the very essence of who he was. He had stayed away from women, built walls to keep his secret safe, and lived in the shadow of his condition. But tonight, something was different. He felt something stir within him, something he thought was gone forever. His ability to function as a man, to feel whole again, was suddenly rekindled the moment he shared that intimate connection with Claire. As he kissed her softly, he felt the bulge down there for the first time in years, a stirring that he couldn't ignore. It was a physical reaction that was so overwhelming, so intense, that it almost scared him. Are you sure? He whispered against her lips, his voice thick with need. Claire nodded, her hands trembling as she reached for him, pulling him closer. The next morning, Alexander woke up with a strange feeling coursing through him. Alive, powerful, whole. He turned to look at Claire, lying beside him, her face peaceful in sleep. His mind was a whirl of disbelief. He had done it. He was able to function as a man last night with Claire. And for the first time in years, he had felt like a real man. Alexander's heart pounded as he carefully slipped out of bed and quietly left the room. He couldn't explain what had happened between them. It defied everything he had been told, everything he had accepted as fact. The desire to know the truth was overwhelming, so he immediately made an appointment with his doctor. The private clinic was quiet and sterile, the walls lined with degrees and medical certifications. Alexander sat in the examination room, his heart racing as the doctor entered. "Mr. Westbrook, what brings you in today?" the doctor asked, reviewing his previous test results. Alexander's breath caught in his throat. "Something's changed." The doctor raised an eyebrow, looking at him curiously. "What exactly has changed?" "I've regained my functionality as a man," Alexander said, his voice thick with disbelief. "It's impossible, but I feel different." The doctor examined him carefully, then glanced at the charts with growing surprise. After a few moments, "You're right, it seems something miraculous has happened," the doctor said after a long pause. "We will run some tests just to be sure." Few minutes later, the doctor exclaimed, "This is remarkable, Mr. Westbrook. Your condition has reversed. Your impotency is no more. Your functionality as a man is intact now. Bravo." Alexander's world tilted on its axis. He could barely breathe as the words sank in. I'm normal again," he whispered. The doctor nodded, clearly astonished. "Yes, it seems so." A few months later, Claire's pregnancy confirmed the impossible. She was carrying their child. Alexander's heart swelled with love and disbelief. They had defied the odds, and their love had created a miracle. The moment Alexander realized he had regained his masculinity and that his love for Claire had sparked the miracle of life, he knew he couldn't keep pretending this was just a contract. He had to make things right. "Claire," he said softly one evening, his voice full of emotion, "you've given me something I never thought I could have. Hope, a family, a future." Claire looked at him, her heart pounding. "What are you saying?" He knelt before her, pulling out a small velvet box, took her hand in his voice thick with emotion. "I'm asking you to marry me, Claire, not because of a contract, but because I love you, because you've shown me what it means to live." Claire's eyes filled with tears, her hand trembling as she accepted the ring. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." Months later, at their baby shower, Alexander's parents were in disbelief. They had once doubted if Alexander, their son, can ever father a child, but now they could see the joy Claire had brought to their son. They showered Claire with gifts, and Alexander's mother wrapped her arms around her, tears of joy in her eyes. "I never thought I'd see this day," Alexander's father said with a laugh. "But Claire, you've given our son a family. You've brought him back to life." As the babies arrived, triplets, 2 beautiful boys and a girl, Alexander held them in his arms with tears in his eyes. They had defied the odds, creating a family built on love, trust, and miracles.